Alright, hello you guys. We have moved on from World War II, and now we are going to start discussing the Cold War. Today's objective is for you to be able to explain some of the causes and effects of the Cold War.
You didn't get a packet.
My God, I'm sorry.
Where have you been?
Thank you.
This one. Yeah, everything is really good.
For real? Oh. Imagine your first day comes back.
Speaking of ACTs, you all need to bring your computer and your charger tomorrow to class, as you will be testing all day. So you definitely need to make sure that you have your laptop and your charger, so your computer doesn't die and you are able to take your test and get that money as they say.
Are we gonna be in one class all day or just go to different classes?
That information I do not know.
Dang it. At least you can
Alright, you guys have lunch soon, so if you guys will be quiet, look, head your attention up to, okay. So when you all look at the screen, you see a map, there's a legend on that map, and the question is, what was the Cold War? So based off of this image, what do you believe that the Cold War was?
Probably wars of communism.
Nice job, Blessing, yes.
There's a war between the US and Russia for no actual battle signed no arms race or anything.
Yeah, no, when you say no actual battles, who are you between?
Between the US and Russia.
Nice, good job.
And good too, bro.
While it's a Cold War, because of the very reason that Keegan just said, there were definitely hot wars and wars going on in other places, proxy wars because of these two fighting, but indirectly, as mentioned. So we are going to get into the notes. If you feel I'm going a little fast, notes are going to be uploaded to Canvas. I don't want to keep going back and forth. I'm going to try to keep a decent pace so that you guys are able to follow along. And we shall begin. Oh, before we begin, I'm sorry, there is another mapping activity. It's in this packet as well. It is going to be due on Thursday. And you won't have access to that map after today, so you want to make sure that you're paying attention when we get there. All right. First things first, the end of World War II in 1945 marked a turning point in U.S. history by taking an active role in world affairs. The USA became a leader in the United Nations and World Bank. The U.S. occupied and helped rebuild Japan after the war. And lastly, the U.S. helped found Israel as a Jewish nation in the Middle East. So, in America, the economy is booming. Because of the atomic bomb, the U.S. is a leader. Because they are a leader, they are helping Japan and helping establish Israel as a Jewish nation as well. Moving on. And 5. You literally have like 4 words to do. You should move closer. I don't think Val's head is your problem. Oh my goodness. Moving on, here's the sign, the symbol, the logo for United Nations. And here are the members part of that nation, or of the United Nations, I'm sorry. And then the United Nations headquarters is located in New York City, New York. And you can find the General Assembly to the left, the Executive Council to the right, and those would be inside. This right here is a representation of the United Nations peacekeeping interventions, and these were from 1945 to the year 2009. And again, anywhere you see that is blue, dark blue or light blue, these are where conventions were happening. I'm sorry, what did you say, Blessing?
Oh, why are so many of them in Africa? Oh my goodness, is that Liberia area?
I don't know why there are so many in Africa, but I do believe that's a good question.
The Europeans went and screwed everything up in there. They did. Sounds like them.
Then you have a bigger representation of some of the places represented. This here is a map of the Middle East. Legend shows you, according to colors, what they're specifying. The Jewish state under 1947 UN partition plan for Palestine. That is labeled in orange, and then you have purple was acquired by Israel during the War of Independence in 1948. The 6-Day War in 67, being occupied by Israel also in 67, but till 82. And then occupied by Israel with the limited Palestinian self-government in the end, and that is labeled by the group. And now we're going to discuss American occupation of Germany. The most important change in U.S. foreign policy after World War II was the beginning of the Cold War. The Cold War was an era of distrust and hostility between the USA and the USSR. It's from 1945 to 1991. It was an era of competing ideologies. The US promoting democracy and capitalism, while the USSR tried to spread communism. And the answers that I was given earlier said just that, so good job, you all. You have Vladimir Lenin. He led the Bolsheviks in the Russian Revolution in 1917. And that is a drawing there representing said information. And then the U.S. sent troops to fight the Red Army during the Russian Civil War. Also representation and photo to the left. I was trying not to. Didn't speak too soon.
Oh, oops. Oh dear.
In the 1920s, Americans feared the spread of communism during the Red Scare. And Then, after Lenin's death in 1924, Joseph Stalin became dictator of the USSR and started his 5-year plans.
Yeah, you really can.
During World War II, the USA and USSR worked together to defeat Axis powers. But World War II increased hostilities between the USA and the USSR. They emerged from the war as rival superpowers, even though they were just working together. And the development of the atomic bomb gave the USA a monopoly on nuclear weapons. So by the end of this war, we now are a superpower, we have a monopoly on nuclear weapons, and our economy is doing quite well. World War II increased hostilities between the USA and the USSR. On your notes, you see this organizer with these 6 definitions, one being the United States and one being the Soviet Union. They are different ideologies, and this here is a smaller version of what you already have in your notes. I'll read off the top 2. For the United States, it was them trying to encourage democracy in other countries to help prevent the rise of communist governments. And in the Soviet Union, they were encouraging communism in other countries as part of a worldwide workers' revolution. At the Yalta Conference, Stalin agreed to allow self-determination in Eastern Europe.
Self-determination, can we go back?
It's on Canvas if she goes too fast.
I didn't mean to go that fast that time, actually. Question?
You put that in the middle.
FDR.
Oh.
But Stalin never did. By the time of the Potsdam Conference, Stalin began extending his control over Eastern Europe. They're not gonna be doing whatever they wanna do there anymore, not under Stalin. Stalin refused to move his military or allow free elections in Eastern Europe. No democracy going on over there. And as a result, Eastern European nations turned to communism and became Soviet satellites, nations influenced by the USSR, the Eastern Bloc. This here is a representation of the information just given. We have the American zone in blue, the British zone in orange, the French zone in, the British zone in red, the Soviet zone in orange, and the French zone in yellow. This is the area that was just spoken of, and over here, these are the areas that are now occupied by allies. No communism going on there because the U.S. is one of the major players, and again, in America, there's democracy, not communism. And at the end of the war, Germany was divided into the zone occupied by the USSR, which became East Germany, and a zone occupied by the U.S., Britain, and France, which became West Germany. And that is what you see highlighted. And you can see their regions of occupation. Since the end of World War II, Stalin has pressured numerous Eastern European communist. If this pattern continues, Western Europe could have been next. Here you have a picture of the Iron Curtain. And can we tell from the photo what the Iron Curtain is separating? Yes.
Are we supposed to answer it?
Yes.
Oh, it's, stopping or representing the spread of communism.
There we go. Representing the spread of communism for the USSR, capitalism and democracy for the US, and that Iron Curtain is the divide between the two ideologies. The US began to view Stalin in the 1940s as the new Hitler, a dangerous dictator who wanted to take over the world. In 1947, the U.S. began a policy of containment, a long-term, patient but firm and vigilant containment of Russian expansionist policies will eventually force the USSR to live with the West, to live in peace with the West, I apologize. And that is a quote from Secretary of State George Marshall at the time. When the USSR began pressuring Greece and Turkey to turn communist, the USA created the Truman Doctrine. This is a U.S. economic and military aid to any country threatened by communism. In return, Stalin would create Comecon, which is essentially the USSR version of the Truman Doctrine. And this is arguably one of the things that marked the Cold War. Arguably, I say, because there are many instances between many people that would say this is actually what started the Cold War. The Truman Doctrine worked, and neither Greece or Turkey fell to communism, and they were the first two places that were given aid through the Truman Doctrine. Next page. We have the T equaling tanks, a representation of Russian pressure. And you see US coming to give aid so that Greece and Turkey do not have to become communists as well. European nations had difficulty recovering after World War II, which led to fears of communism in Europe. The U.S. created the Marshall Plan, offered $13 billion to help rebuild post-war Europe. Because if we remember, like after World War I, it's devastated. There's nothing there. You can't do anything. You can't build anything. You can't grow anything. Agriculture's dead. The industry is dead. And with that being said, U.S. came to provide aid. By 1952, Western Europe recovered and communism never took root. And this is arguably directly related to the Marshall Plan and getting the money from the U.S. at the time. Marshall Plan equals money. The Marshall Plan to aid Europe was from 1948 to 1952. And here's a representation of funds allocated and where they were going. How much and where. In 1948, the USSR used military force to turn Czechoslovakia to communism. This led to fears that Stalin would use similar tactics in Western Europe. And there's a difference between Western Europe and Eastern Europe because one of these places are getting aid from the United States and the other is not. And it's nothing but a quick walk to go see what's going on the other side and to become quickly frustrated and irritated that you can't receive any of this aid from the United States because Stalin said so. The United States said everybody can have this money, but under Stalin you can't, and so you're living in poverty essentially when you could have this help, but again, Big Brother said no, so you can't have it. But you can go and have a good time and live it up, then you gotta go back home. In 1949, the USA formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, better known as NATO, and that is a military alliance among democratic countries. You do have the USSR version of that, which is the Warsaw Pact, the same thing, just for the European nations. You have NATO on the left, communist bloc on the right, top and bottom, however you want to view that, navy in red, nonetheless. NATO was one of many alliances the USA would form with democratic nations over the course of the Cold War. And this is showing you all the nations involved with NATO, and as you can see, there are quite a few. This page also lists the different companies or agencies formulated as well. In 1948, the USSR responded to containment by cutting off all traffic to Berlin and East Germany. The USA began the Berlin Airlift to bring food, supplies, fuel, to keep West Berlin from turning into communism. The standoff lasted 2 weeks until Stalin lifted the blockade. And the blockade was put in place because, again, Stalin did not want anybody receiving anything from US or its allies. He figured that with his Comecon plan, he would be able to help the economy and they wouldn't need anything. However, the US was like, no, we're gonna go ahead and fly over your blockade and bring them the stuff that they need anyway. And that's what they did. And there's the help that's coming. Berlin Airlift. So from June 1948 to May 1949, Allied planes took off and landed every 3 minutes in West Berlin. On 278,000 flights, pilots brought in 2.3 million tons of food, fuel, medicine, and even Christmas gifts to people in West Berlin. Some propaganda for you. Milk. Now, weapons of democracy. There's a new weapon of democracy. By 1947, the US government created 3 new agencies during the Cold War. You get the Department of Defense, which directs the Army and the Navy. And in 1947, the military created the Air Force. You also get the Central Intelligence Agency, better known as the CIA. And they are tasked with collecting and managing information among all government agencies. Last but not least, you have the National Security Council, and they are tasked with advising the president on national security issues. Bless you.
Wait, is that 2 words?
Is what 2 words?
The Air Force, and we just put 2 words.
I believe Air Force is 2 words. All right. The new Air Air Force was the preferred military agency of the Cold War because airplanes could drop nuclear bombs if needed. And just preferred by a lot of people at that time in general because, again, you could drop bombs as opposed to being the boots on the ground, being shot, or potentially having a bomb thrown at you or where you're sleeping. They'd rather be the ones dropping the bomb than potentially staying alive a lot longer. Then you have the hierarchy of the Department of Defense. At the top, you have the Secretary of Defense, who oversees the Deputy Secretary of Defense, who oversees the departments of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, who oversee people within that department. And then you have the majors, commanders, and agencies under that. The logo for the CIA. And a couple more. We're going to get into the Cold War expanding, and there's only a few fill-ins to go. I'll give like 2 more, and then I'm gonna let you guys prep for lunch. The U.S. monopoly on nuclear weapons technology ended in 1949 when the USSR successfully tested their own atomic bomb. So at this point, the USA is no longer holding a monopoly on nuclear weapons. USSR knows how to make them too, and they're not the only ones. The Soviet atomic bomb motivated the U.S. to regain its nuclear advantage. And in 1952, the U.S. tested the first hydrogen bomb, which was 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb. If you remember class last week, we did the simulation online where you could see the effects of the atomic bomb. This would be 1,000 times worse, as it says. The Soviets responded with their own hydrogen bomb in 1953. So again, US isn't holding any patents, US is not monopolizing, people are realizing what we're doing. They understand that we have the power to do it, they have the power to do it too, and they're not going to stop because the United States is a superpower and everybody wants to be on top. We'll stop there. So when we come back, we'll pick up on containment and you guys will start working on the mapping activity that will be due on Thursday.
What do you have to have with you tomorrow?
Laptops and charger.
Your charger, that's the key. I know you guys will probably remember your laptops, well, I think you will. Charger on the other hand.